Hello folks, well it's an absolutely glorious early spring day today. It's early March and behind me you can see my Berghaus Grampian 2 geodesic dome tent. The very windy weather we've had this winter has made me reconsider what I'm going to use this tent for. So I thought I'd take this opportunity to, for a start, show you how to pitch it, and secondly give you a look round and explain why I'm thinking about changing its use. So yeah, welcome back to my channel. My name's John and I make videos on camping, walking and astronomy. If you like what you see in this video, then please check my channel out, as you may find others that interest you there. But in the meantime, let's crack on with this video. So the Grampian 2 is a two-person geodesic dome tent, and my intention when I bought this tent was to use it as a kind of base campsite type tent when I wanted a bit of luxury. It's very nice as a two-person tent. This particular model here is a 2-year-old version. It's green. The modern version is a nice red colour. Initially I didn't like the red, but that's sort of grown on me now. The drawback for me is most of my wild camping's done in my localish area, which is the South Downs, and a bright red tent might not be the best idea in that environment. Would look brilliant in a mountain environment and fantastic in the snow, but perhaps not too good for what I want. But anyway, the reason that I'm thinking about changing the use for this tent here is the very, very windy winter we've had. I've had a couple of wild camps this winter on the South Downs that have been appallingly windy. Now, you don't normally think of the South Downs as a windy or more extreme environment, if you like. That's more associated with mountain tops and things. But it's caught me aback this year, really, how windy it actually is on the South Downs. And I think the reason is that there's basically nothing to stop the wind when it comes off the sea, and once you're up there, there's nothing to hide behind. So I had one camp in December where I had 40-mile-an-hour winds, and I was in my MSR Elixir 1 tent. That was right on its limit for that trip. I hadn't intended to have it out in those winds. The actual strength of the wind surprised me. The tent survived okay. It was brilliantly livable to live in, but I have ended up with kind of one permanent bent pole, and I think had the winds been much more, I would have had damage to the tent. And then a few weeks later, I was out in one of the 3 big storms that cropped up over a week period. I was out in not the worst storm. I think it was Storm Dudley was the one I was in, but nonetheless that was 60-mile-an-hour gusts. And on that camp I was in my Van Gogh Torridon 200, which is ostensibly a 4-season tent, but of semi-geodesic design. And again, that tent was right on its limit. So I started thinking about what I'm going to do next year as regards winter camping, and I feel really I need a stronger tent if I'm going to go out in those sorts of conditions. Now, a geodesic dome tent like this is typically the sort of tent that you'd see pitched in places like Everest Base Camp. The construction is generally regarded as the strongest of the tent construction types. This particular one, the Grampian 2, is at the lower end of the cost scale. I think if you can still find this one, the green version, it's about £130 or so. The red version ostensibly has a list price of, I think, £300, but usually it's for sale around the £200 mark. Stepping up in quality, if you like, and cost from this tent would be something like the Wild Country Trizar 2-door tent, and that's around the kind of £300 mark. Up from that, you've got tents like the Van Gogh Force 10 Mountain 2 and the Outkit Kangaroo tent, they sit around the £500 mark, and up from that you're in the realms of North Face Mountain 25s, Terra Nova Quasars and Mountain Hardware Trango 2s, and these sorts of tents sit around the sort of £700 mark. Basically, the more money you spend, the better quality the materials are, and the stiffer the poles essentially. But nonetheless, I suspect that this sort of geodesic dome here, at this kind of price point, is probably good enough for what I want, because I'm not going to sit there at Everest Base Camp with these things. So in order to call itself a geodesic dome, the tent has to have a minimum of 4 pole crossing points. So here we've got one here, the same on the back, and there's one on the top here. So there's 5 in this particular tent, and that's probably the most common arrangement. So the question arises then is, why are these things rarely used nowadays for people going wild camping? And the elephant in the room here is weight at the end of the day. This tent weighs 4.2 kilos. There's a little internal ground sheet that you can get rid of that probably knocks off 100 or 200 grams, but you're still looking at 4 kilos. The Van Gogh Force 10 Mountain 25 I think weighs about 3.5 or 3.6 kilos, something like that. The North Face Mountain 25 weighs 4.4 kilos. So weights of around 4 kilos are fairly typical for this design of tent, simply because you've got loads of poles, quite a lot of material. And this is really what means they're not so popular as wild camping tents. For me, I'm quite used to carrying a 3.2 kilo tent, my 2-person Van Gogh Torridon tent. So I'm not overly put off by that, and I'm fairly keen to see how this tent performs as a wild camping tent. Generally for me, I'm not travelling huge distances when I go wild camping, so I suspect the weight won't be an issue. I'm going to try it out in a wild camp, probably in the South Downs relatively soon, just to see how it pans out in that sort of environment rather than a campsite. But I would quite like to get it on a kind of 600-700 metre height mountain top, just to see how that works. But yeah, if any of you have got this tent and use it for wild camping, or use other geodesic domes for wild camping, I'd be pleased to hear what your experiences are of them in the comments, so I'll get a bit of a heads up before I go wild camping in them. But yeah, anyway, I'll show you how the tent's pitched, and we'll have a little look inside. One of the reasons I actually really like this tent is that it's the only geodesic dome that I could find that's actually pitch outer first. All of the others are inner pitch first, and in the UK that can be a little bit of a disadvantage. When the tent comes out the bag new, the inner is separate from the outer, and once you've pitched it the first time though, you keep it all clipped together so it goes up in one go, which brings the pitching time right down. I'd strongly suggest that the first time you pitch this, you do it in your back garden or a park like I am now, so that you can get all the inner connected and you're not trying to do that on a windy hillside. What I've done today is I've disconnected the inner before I came, so I can simulate what it's like when you get it out the bag as new. So you'll see the process of clipping the inner in. So yeah, let's get cracking with pitching. The tent comes in a stuff sack which you load up and empty out from one end, and when you empty it out, the bag contains the fly sheet, an inner. There's also a small ground sheet for one of the porch areas. There are 22, I think, pegs. They're fairly cheap pegs, and 4 poles. They're colour coded, 2 blue and 2 red. The instructions for pitching the tent are sewn into the stuff sack, and in addition to that you also get a small repair kit. So the first job to do is to carefully clip the poles together, and as is usual with poles, you do need to take some care with this to avoid damaging them. And then once you've done that, because this is a fly sheet first pitching tent, you lay the fly sheet on the ground with the doors oriented as you want them, more or less. So now you thread the poles with blue tips into the sleeves with the blue colour coded markings on the end, and these are the poles that run along the length of the tent, and you do that to both poles until they're fully threaded through and a bit of pole is sticking out on either end. You then repeat the exercise with the red poles, and these run essentially across the tent, and once again the poles and the sleeves are colour coded to make it easy. So starting with the blue poles, put one end of the pole into the hole on the strap, and then take the other blue pole and repeat with that one. So now go to the other end of one of the blue poles and put its little blue end into the corresponding hole on the strap, and then move to the second of the blue poles and do exactly the same thing. You'll notice that the tent starts to sort of pop up and get a bit of shape at this point. So now we just repeat the exercise with the red pole, putting one end of each pole into the little hole on the strap, and then bending the pole and inserting it into the strap on the corresponding side. And you'll note that the tent's now more or less taken shape. The tent's freestanding, so it's possible to move it around at this point, but it is worth bearing in mind when setting up this tent that it will act like a sail in high winds, so it's very important that you've got at least one corner pegged down or something tied to your rucksack to stop it potentially blowing away. So now you can tension the straps where the poles connect to make the fly sheet nice and taut, and then go round and peg the tent out a bit better, pull the porches out, get them pegged down until you've got the tent completely pitched up. If this wasn't the first time pitching this tent, you'd now more or less be done apart from putting the guy lines out, because the inner would be connected to the fly sheet and it would already be set up inside. But if this is the first time that you've set the tent up, you now need to get the inner clipped in to the fly sheet. So if you need to clip the inner in, the first thing to do is to lay the inner out with the doors in the correct place, and then drag the whole lot inside the tent in that orientation. What you'll see on the inner tent are some hooks, and these hooks basically run along the length of the inner, and they clip onto the little triangles that are running along the base of the tent. You'll also see elasticated hoops, and these hoops fit on hooks that run along the side walls of the tent and the ceiling. And what you basically want to do is to work your way evenly down the tent from one porch end down to the other And if you start to lose yourself as you're doing this, one of the elasticated loops is yellow, and that goes on the hook with the yellow tab. And I find this quite useful because it does help me orient myself inside the tent, because there are an awful lot of these elasticated loops and hooks. So when you eventually get to the other end of the tent, you simply clip the base down and clip in the last of the hooks and the job's done. And you can see here there's quite a good separation between the inner and the outer of the tent. So the only thing left to do now is to peg out the guy lines, which I'm not going to bother with today because it's I'm in a playing field and it's a lovely day. The guy lines aren't fantastic quality, but they're sort of adequate, if you like. One thing I did notice was the instructions suggested that you needed to use a Y-type peg like this when you're pegging out the guy lines. It was specifically mentioned in the instructions, but these aren't included in the bag of bits that you get, so you have to get them separately. So the final job, if you want to use it, is to clip in the ground sheet for one of the porches, and this simply clips into the corner where the poles are. So let's have a little look at some of the external features on this tent then. The hydrostatic head rating of the fly sheet is 3,000 millimeters, and the bathtub internal ground sheet is 5,000 millimeters. One thing I noticed with the latest version, the red version, is they're suggesting on the outer of the tent, like the printing that's shown here, that the waterproofness is 5,000 millimeters of head. And I'm not actually sure whether they've upped the waterproofness of the fly sheet, or whether they're referring to the 5,000 millimeters of the inner, the ground tub of the inner, because the web information seems to suggest that the fly sheet waterproofness is still 3,000 mil. In reality, 3,000 mil is fine for a fly sheet, because you're not kind of kneeling on it or anything like that. So there's no problem whichever way the new one goes. Holes are, I think, 8.5 millimeter alloy. They're branded Berghaus. They're probably just a kind of generic Chinese pole at the end of the day. The more expensive tents, more extreme ones, like the ones used at Everest Base Camp, perhaps the North Face Mountain 25, would have poles of 9.5 or 10 millimeters, I think. To help reduce condensation, there's 4 of these vents, one on each corner basically. The poles feed through these mesh sleeves. They don't snag too badly, and it's possible to put it up by yourself. It's a bit easier if there's someone else at the other end of the pole, mind you, but it is perfectly possible to do this on your own. The fly sheet's ripstop polyester material, as is the bathtub part of the inner. The tent's basically symmetrical, so there's an identical porch at either end of the tent. The zip's a 3/4 zip and is protected from rain by this cover. And the door is rolled away using a clip and a loop. The inner of the tent is black, so this makes it quite dark inside the tent, like in the mornings and stuff. Zips to the inner are these fluorescent things, and the inner is one of these O-type doors, which is very easy to open and close. The inner itself is absolutely enormous. You'd get 2 people in here and a load of gear quite easily. For one person, really, it's overkill. It's extremely spacious. Once in the tent, you'll see you can roll the door away, the inner door into that pocket there, so that's quite handy. There are 4 pockets, 1 on each corner, and these are fairly big pockets, and the obligatory warning sign not to cook inside your tent, as we all know. There's only one hook in the tent for a lantern, so if you wanted to run lines across your tent, you'd have to kind of sew those in yourself. In terms of interior ventilation, there's the two doors have like a third of them or so mesh, insect-type mesh, that you can open up. There's no other mesh to open inside this tent, unlike say the Mountain 25 from Van Gogh that's got mesh holes in the ceiling. So you're reliant on opening the outer vents and using this mesh here to let air through. I haven't had condensation in the tent yet, but I may well have not used it in an environment where I'd expect it. But I would plan on opening and closing the doors as necessary on the inside to try and keep control of that. Porch size is okay. You can get rucksacks and boots and things in here. It's possible to cook inside this porch, but you would want to open the door to let some of the steam out, and obviously you'd have to take a great deal of care. And if you were cooking in the porch, it'd be better if you could completely open the door. Having said that, with the door completely open, you're still quite protected from either side. So that's how I've done it and how I intend to carry on cooking in here. Stitching quality on the inside seems to be okay. I'm sure it's not up to Hilleberg standards and it's just like single stitching, but I haven't noticed any real issues yet. I've got a little bit of dodgy stitching on the zip here, which I keep meaning to cut off, but forgetting. Doesn't seem to have got any worse, but nonetheless it's there. Again, probably you pay your money, you take your choice. Like I say, it's not a £900 Hilleberg tent, but so far that hasn't actually got any worse. In terms of headspace and sidewall space, geodesic domes, this is where they've got a huge advantage. They're absolutely enormous. I'm just under 5'9", and I would say I've got about 12 inches above my head here, and I can sit pretty close to the sidewalls before they start interfering with my head. And at the other end of the tent, again, I've got about 12 inches or so of space at the bottom of my feet. So there we go. I hope some of you have found this useful. I'm really looking forward to taking this tent out while camping rather than just campsite camping. And hopefully I'll be doing that in the next sort of month or so. If any of you have been out, like I said earlier, in this tent or other geodesic domes, maybe the more expensive ones, just let me know how you got on with them, how you cope with the weight, how you cope with putting a relatively complex tent up on your own. So I'd be really pleased to hear that. But for now I shall say cheerio and take care. I'll see you next time.